Always remember, the trigger is the release. What is up, alienARMy? I am Oculus, the alien next door, purveyor of esoteric lore. And on this channel, we discuss everything out of this world. So today's topic, we are going to be talking about triggers. Yes. Okay, this can apply to anyone. There might be a point in your experience where you are no longer triggered by anything, and this is typically considered to be an enlightenment of some sorts, and some people do attain this. So listen, anything is possible. There is a way for you to release every single one of your triggers and not be bothered by them. But if you haven't reached that stage yet and there's something that might trigger you, then this is the video for you, because we're going to talk about how you motherfucking release them. So when we think of a trigger, what do we typically picture? We picture a gun. We pull the trigger, and what happens? What is released from that gun? Now, it could be a fucking water gun, you know what I'm saying? I don't know why your minds went elsewhere, but basically the trigger, once we release it, we're pulling it back, we're holding on to the trigger, and then we release it. What happens now? Whatever was in there, and let's bring it into a metaphor, energetically speaking, now we've released that energy, so it's no longer inside the barrel of the metaphorical gun, and now we have freed ourselves from that trigger. But before someone gets to that point, how can they recognize a trigger to release it? So a trigger is something, and this is not having to do with demonic energies or entities, although sometimes it can be. I'm not saying that it can't be, but this is more in the context of this video. We're going to be talking about like emotional paradigms and triggers like that. So a trigger can come in. Let's say you're having a conversation with your friend and they have no idea that something they would say might trigger you. Like, let's say they call you an idiot. Like, you say something to them and they're like fucking around. Oh, you're such an idiot. Why'd you say that? Like, and it really was harmless. Like, they didn't mean it in that way. And this could go for anything. Okay, I'm just using a light example, but literally you can be triggered from an inanimate object or something in your environment. But I'm just going to use this one in the terms of you were joking around with your friend and they're like, oh, you're such an idiot. And then the word idiot, if it happens to be one's trigger, is going to, a whole shit show is going to ensue after that. Why the fuck did you call me that? What did you mean? I'm not a fucking idiot. It's just like, whoa. And it's like this reaction that is, it's coming from a place of, there was no chaos or fighting or arguing going on. It was just something that came out of nowhere. Someone said something out of sheer innocence because they didn't know that that triggered you. And then all of a sudden you fly into a rage, and they really meant nothing by it. There's a total difference from if you're in an argument with someone and it's getting heated and you know that they're saying shit to piss you off and you know you're saying shit to piss them off. It is not like that. A trigger, you might know someone else's trigger and you might intentionally sometimes say some shit to piss them off, but a trigger is something that typically occurs when one is not really prepared for it, and it comes sort of like in a innocent type of way. That is how you recognize a trigger, because it might seem like an innocuous statement or word or phrase or object or even a place. Like, let's say someone could be triggered by a town name or something, right? If it reminds them of someone or something. But however you want to look at it, a trigger is something that really has no meaning. It's just sort of like, literally, it does not have a meaning aside from that you're triggered by it. But that's why that's what we're talking about today, how to remove it so you're not bothered by it no more, you know? So with the trigger, now it's an innocuous word, or it's an innocuous object, or it's an innocuous place, and there's no mayhem going on, but then all of a sudden you're triggered, you fly into a rage, you feel like a constriction going on in your heart chakra energy and lower perhaps, and you fly into a rage, you burst into tears, some shit happens to cause an emotional turmoil. And that's how you recognize a trigger, basically, because there was no harm intended by by it, but you took it in whichever way because it was a trigger. So if you want to think about, let's say someone, they're eating food that they don't like, right? And they were a little kid, because a lot of times triggers can happen very early along in your journey when you're in those formative years. I mean, obviously because you're in the theta state, but regardless, a lot of times that can happen. Like a kid can eat a candy bar and they don't like the taste of it. It just tastes really bad to them and they're like, ooh, yuck. And it's not even like the candy bar is doing anything to them, but let's say the candy bar is now presented to them when they are older and someone offers them that same type of candy bar. Remember, light example, this could be anything. Use your imagination, okay? Someone offers them that same candy bar.
What the fuck are you trying to do? You know I hate that shit. You don't give a fuck about me because you know I hate that type of candy bar.
And the motherfucker that handed it to you is like, oh,
Fuck you then. I ain't giving you nothing no more.
so that would be an example of a trigger, because something happened that was potentially uncomfortable, or it was traumatic, and there's levels, you know. Someone can be triggered over a paper clip, okay? Like, so we're not gonna throw shade on anyone's trigger because it's all unique to them. It's all dependent upon the individual's perception of whatever it was. So the candy bar is offered because that individual had a poor experience with that type of candy bar when they were younger, or even if it was like 2 months ago, it could have happened, right? A trigger can be formed at any time. It can also be removed at any time. So your friend that offered you the candy bar is like, what just happened here? Like, I meant nothing by that. I was trying to be nice to you. But because that trigger, there's something inside the subconscious mind. There's something that the psyche is associating negatively with that trigger. It needs to be released. So anytime anyone is triggered, this is why I said you can get to the point of being not triggered by anything at all, just being blasé and nonchalant as you go about your third dimensional realm experience. You can get to that point because the trigger comes up, you recognize it, you're like, whoa, that was out of context. Like, typically, for the most part, a trigger reaction will be out of context for whatsoever place that it was presented. So candy bar, perfect example. There is no reason to get mad at someone else if they're trying to be generous and offer you a fucking candy bar and someone just reacts and it's like that. That's how you recognize it, because the reaction, not the response. Remember, when we're reacting out something. When we're responding, it's something totally brand new. So you recognize the trigger, you see from your higher self why it triggered you. However, you know, you want to do that. You could go in, like, when was the first time that particular thing, when is the first time you heard about it, when is the first time you heard that name, when was the first time you went to that location, when was the first time you bit into that candy bar. Go back to the beginning, look at that, say, oh, that's where that came from. And then how you pluck it out, you say, and this is kind of weaving into, like, you know, paradigms and patterns, but not really. I'm going to keep it on triggers, but it's like you can kind of see how the two will be connected. So you go in and you pluck that trigger out because you say, I acknowledge you where the fuck you originated. Whoosh. Now I cast you forth into the nothingness from whence you came. And then boom, the trigger is released. That's why triggers occur, because they want to be released. So the stagnant energy that's stored in the subconscious mind, it don't want to fucking be in there. It wants to be released. And that's why a trigger can present itself not so that one needs to keep repeating that same pattern over and over and over again. It arises so that it can be released, because it is a trigger, and a trigger doesn't want to be like pulled back in that fucking uncomfortable position for eternity. You know, the trigger wants to be released, like whoosh, super soaker up in this motherfucker. I don't know where that came from, but there you go. And the trigger wants to be released, okay? Pop off, we're done, no more trigger, it has been released, because you get to the root. So if you're having an out of character reaction to something, not a response, you go into, you dig in your memory bank, or you ask the universe, when was the first time that this candy bar was presented to me that I didn't react? You associate what it was, in this example, candy bar. You go back to the beginning, okay, time traveling, and then you go in however you have to fix that situation, okay? But you remove the trigger, whoosh, You toss it aside. You say, I am light and no longer burdened by this. I send you, trigger, now into the nothingness from whence you came. I do thank you for presenting yourself to me so that I can see what is going to elevate my motherfucking state of mind and make me feel all the more good, ecstatic, joyful, exuberant, blissful, serene, tranquil. Because every time you remove a trigger, it's metaphorically like removing a thorn in your side. It's like a thorn in your side is not necessarily overly painful or dramatic, but it can be uncomfortable. So you remove the trigger, and then now boom, nothing bothers you. And as you move along on your journey, you might start to notice that you have different options presented to you. Because let's say you're presented with that candy bar again. This is after you've released the trigger. You're like, okay, I know where that candy bar came from, and I done dealt with it. I sent him on his way. He went a packing, okay? Trigger man went a packing. And then you sent him on his merry way. He ain't bothering you no more. Now you're free to see the candy bar as a neutral, innocuous object. And the next time that that candy bar is presented itself, you observe it. Oh, thanks for offering me that candy bar, but that's not really my cup of tea. I would rather you enjoy it than I would, right? Like you politely decline the candy bar. And now you have changed it. You have eliminated the pattern, the paradigm, because the pattern can only repeat. It cannot respond. If you respond to something that was a pattern and it triggered you, now guess what? It's dissolved. It's done. It's no longer, because you didn't react, you responded, and now you created an entirely new wavelength. So now the candy bar is presented to you, and you see the candy bar all over the place. You're like, oh, yeah, that's not my cup of tea. I'll get my own dessert. You know what I mean? So that is how to recognize and release a trigger, because you pluck it out. Now you see where it originated from, and nothing is triggering you anymore. And you can go about your daily experience and not be triggered by anything, because really these days it seems like motherfuckers are just triggered by the wildest shit that I'm like, what? Even though everyone's own experience is different, it's like, wait, that triggered you? And it's more of like a fear-based ego reaction to the trigger. So no one should be having to censor themselves because someone else has a trigger to something. This does not mean go around and be disrespectful intentionally to motherfuckers, but it's more along the lines of, if someone offers person A an innocuous candy bar, but that's their trigger, like, oh hell no, fuck you, like, and they go off on their high horse because they're fucking triggered, and now the person is left with a candy bar in their hand. They're like, wait, I was just trying to be nice. So someone who is easily triggered is not going to be a pleasant person to be around, because this is someone who just expects that the universe needs to be padded for them, because if they trip and fall, they want that nice soft comfort of cushion, where it's like, we're creating our own reality. All of us are creating our own reality, but that doesn't mean that we are going to be in observance of things that we adore all of the fucking time. There might be something that we don't agree with, and we're like, okay, that's what's going on over there. They're eating them candy bars that I don't like, but you know, I'm gonna be over here, right? That's the difference. You can be in observance of something that perhaps formerly triggered you, but now, because you've elevated past that, you don't need to be pacified. Because someone that is easily triggered walks around expecting the universe to just to provide pacifiers for everything, because it's like, wait, why is something that has nothing to do with you in that moment bothering you? Why are you triggered by that? Why do you need a pacifier? Just deal with whatever that trigger is, remove it, and be like, okay, it sets you free, it liberates you, because now we have attained true neutral again, because we're not having that scales, right? Because in our experience, we are creating everything, but if we have a trigger inside us, because we're creating our own experience via the subconscious mind, maybe sometimes the conscious mind isn't aware of that trigger. The conscious mind is not aware of that trigger. It's like hiding around like the fucking Princess and the Pea, I think it is, right? And it's like uncomfortable, but the subconscious is still fixating on, so it's creating more of those triggers. And then that is how individuals can manifest things inadvertently, or so they think, because the trigger is in the depths of the subconscious. It hasn't been liberated and set free, so it's still going to present itself, because that's how the universe works. It's mirroring back to the observer that which they are carrying within them. So when the conscious mind observes, oh shit, here's the pea under the mattress, you know, we gonna throw that away. Now you can observe anything and you will be triggered by nothing, because you have removed the source, you have released it. The trigger is the release. I am so glad I'm not carrying that around with me anymore, because I could observe that and I'm like, okay, that's what's going on over there. Now you're true neutral. There's no trigger that's keeping someone in disharmony. You release it. Now the scales are even. Your heart is as light as a feather. You are triggered by nothing. You respond to everything. You react to nothing, unless you want to repeat something again, because that's how it works. Patterns can also work in a beneficial way as well. That's just food for thought. But for the purpose of this video, how to release a trigger, the trigger is the release. That's what we did. I am Oculus, the alien next door, and we will chit chat again soon.